Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Canada Truth Channel, where Canada, the illusion of freedom and system of control is exposed. Let's call today's video Alberta Independence, What You Need to Know. Now, disclaimer right off the bat. I support Alberta independence 100%, as I have shown throughout the history of this channel and my previous Canada 101 channel going back 15 years now. Canada 101 was deleted during the purge in 2019-2020. So I had to start over from scratch with a new channel. I am not in any way, shape, or form trying to dissuade the people of Alberta from voting in the upcoming referendum regarding Alberta independence. I am, however, showing you the predetermined outcome. Why do I say it's a predetermined outcome? Because the federal government and several provinces in Canada cannot survive without pillaging money from Alberta. All of the provinces that rely on Alberta equalization payments to survive cannot allow Alberta to leave Canada and lose those equalization payments. Neither can the federal government. As you can see by this headline, CSIS director warns of foreign meddling in potential Alberta sovereignty vote. Another, CSIS braces for possible foreign interference as Alberta, Quebec eye sovereignty. They're already laying the groundwork to claim that the outcome of the Alberta referendum on independence was swayed by foreign interference. We know from history that there's already been reports on foreign interference in Canada's democratic processes and institutions back in 2024, which of course the federal government ignored because it did not benefit them. More articles, anti-authority narratives could tear fabric of society, intelligence report warns. RCMP report to federal government sees democracy as a threat. They don't see democracy as a threat, ladies and gentlemen. They see you and I, the people of Canada and the provinces, as the threat. So, where am I going with all this? Well, some of you may remember the 1995 Quebec referendum on separation. A lot of emotions. It was a very, very, very close vote. Most people in Canada don't remember how close that vote actually was. And if you go through the election webpage from Quebec, it breaks down by riding how close it actually was. But what they count on you forgetting, and what terrified the federal government more than anything, was how small the margin actually was. 49.42% of voters in Quebec voted yes, we want to separate from Canada. 50.58 voted no. That's how close that referendum actually was. And when the federal government saw that tiny margin, it terrified them. So what did they do? In 2000, they came out with the Clarity Act. And the Clarity Act makes it virtually impossible, despite the will of the people, to actually separate from Canada, which we're going to get into right away. Those of you familiar with the channel will know that I have done several videos on the Statute of Westminster and what it did for the provinces and the people of Canada. It gave us full autonomy and made each province a sovereign state. These are facts in law. This is not conjecture. This is not conspiracy theory. These are not my words. These are their own acts and statutes. And in case you haven't seen previous videos, this is the ridiculous explanation by the federal government why in 1931 Canada chose not to exercise its full autonomy as provided for under the Statute of Westminster. Canada did not decide. Prime Minister Bennett and his cabinet decided because if the people of the provinces were properly informed of their new status as sovereign states, the government would collapse because it was illegitimate, illegal, and unlawful and de facto as of December 11th, 1931. So all those federal employees would have lost their paychecks, their pensions, their ability to pillage the people of Canada and the resources of Canada. So they didn't tell us. And they still haven't told us today. And I'm not going to go through this ridiculous explanation because it's gaslighting. So because the vote in 1995 was so close, the federal government enacted the Clarity Act to prevent any province from leaving Canada despite the will of the people of that province. And as we go through this very short act, you will see how, despite the will of the people of Alberta, Alberta independence will not be allowed. Once again, I support Alberta independence for the last 20 years, and I've been trying to educate Canadians. Not my words, not conjecture, not conspiracy theory, reviewing their own acts and statutes. So let's get into it. An act to give effect to the requirements for clarity as set out in the opinion of the Supreme Court of Canada in the Quebec secession reference. May I remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that courts and judges in Canada are appointed by the government. So to expect them to bite the hand that feeds them and gives them their authority is naive at best. Preamble. Whereas the Supreme Court of Canada has confirmed that there is no right under international law or under the Constitution of Canada for the National Assembly, legislature, or government of Quebec to effect the secession of Quebec from Canada unilaterally. So despite the will of the people, they say, well, there's no law. We haven't written a law that allows you to secede from Canada, so you can't. Right there. First sentence. Whereas any proposal relating to the breakup of a democratic state is a matter of the utmost gravity and is of fundamental importance to all of its citizens. Whereas the government of any province of Canada is entitled to consult its population by a referendum on any issue and is entitled to formulate the wording of its referendum question. Whereas the Supreme Court of Canada has determined that the result of a referendum on secession of a province from Canada must be free of ambiguity, both in terms of the question asked and in terms of the support it achieves, if that result is to be taken as an expression of the democratic will that would give rise to an obligation to enter into negotiations that might lead to secession. Do you see where this is going already, ladies and gentlemen? Whereas the Supreme Court of Canada has stated that democracy means more than a simple majority rule, that a clear majority in favor of secession would be required to create an obligation to negotiate secession, and that a qualitative evaluation is required to determine whether a clear majority in favor of secession exists in the circumstances. Whereas the Supreme Court of Canada has confirmed that in Canada, the secession of a province to be lawful would require an amendment to the Constitution of Canada. That such an amendment would perforce require negotiations in relation to secession involving at least the governments of all the provinces and the government of Canada, and that those negotiations would be governed by the principles of federalism, democracy, constitutionalism, and the rule of law, and the protection of minorities. Whereas, in light of the finding by the Supreme Court of Canada that it would be for elected representatives to determine what constitutes a clear question and what constitutes a clear majority in a referendum held in a province on secession, the House of Commons, as the only political institution elected to represent all Canadians, has an important role in identifying what constitutes a clear question and a clear majority sufficient for the government of Canada to enter into negotiations in relation to the secession of a province from Canada. And whereas it is incumbent on the government of Canada not to enter into negotiations that might lead to the secession of a province from Canada, and that could consequently entail the termination of citizenship and other rights that Canadian citizen resident in the province enjoy as full participants in Canada, unless the population of that province has clearly expressed its democratic will that the province secede from Canada. Do you see what they're saying here, ladies and gentlemen? They're saying it's not up to the people of Canada. It's up to the government to decide whether the question is clear. And if the majority sufficient for secession is enough. It's not up to the people of Canada. It's up to the government and the other provinces and anyone else who wants to shoot it down. Let's continue. Now, therefore, Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of Senate and House of Commons of Canada, enacts as follows. So the illegal, unlawful, de facto government of Canada, with the consent of the Queen, enacts this legislation without lawful authority, as I've shown you many times in previous videos. House of Commons to consider question. The House of Commons shall, within 30 days after the government of a province tables in its legislative assembly or otherwise officially releases the question that it intends to submit to its voters in a referendum relating to the proposed secession of the province from Canada, consider the question, and by resolution set out its determination whether the question is clear. So even if the reasonable question for the Alberta independence referendum were, say, should Alberta secede from Canada? Yes or no? That's pretty clear. That's pretty concise. But it's not up to us to decide that. It's up to the House of Commons. Extension of time. Where the 30 days referred to in subsection 1 occur, in whole or in part, during a general election of members to serve in the House of Commons, the 30 days shall be extended by an additional 40 days. Considerations. In considering the clarity of a referendum question, the House of Commons shall consider whether the question would result in a clear expression of the will of the population of a province on whether the province should cease to be part of Canada and become an independent state. And may I remind you all provinces have been independent states since December 11th, 1931, after the passing of the Statute of Westminster. They just didn't tell the people. Where no clear expression of will. For the purpose of subsection 3, a clear expression of the will of the population of a province that the province cease to be part of Canada could not result from a referendum question that merely focuses on a mandate to negotiate without soliciting a direct expression of the will of the population of that province on whether the province should cease to be part of Canada, or a referendum question that envisages the possibilities in addition to the secession of the province from Canada, such as economic or political arrangements with Canada that obscure a direct expression of the will of the population of that province on whether the province should cease to be part of Canada. Once again, do you honestly believe that the other provinces and the federal government, who rely on billions of dollars each year from Alberta, are going to allow Alberta to leave? Other views to be considered. In considering the clarity of a referendum question, the House of Commons shall take into account the views of all political parties represented in the legislative assembly of the province whose government is proposing the referendum on secession, and any formal statements or resolutions by the government or legislative assembly of any province or territory of Canada, any formal statements or resolutions by the Senate, any formal statements or resolutions by the representatives of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, especially those in the province whose government is proposing the referendum on secession, and any other views it considers to be relevant. They're laying it out pretty clear. No negotiations if question is not clear. But jumping back, so the referendum goes through. However, someone in the Alberta government gets paid off to write a statement that says, no, we don't agree with this. Well, guess what happens? The Government of Canada shall not enter into negotiations on the terms on which a province might cease to be part of Canada if the House of Commons determines, pursuant to this section, that a referendum question is not clear and, for that reason, would not result in a clear expression of the will of the population of that province on whether the province should cease to be part of Canada. Again, it's not up to the people of Canada. It's up to the other provinces and the Government of Canada to decide whether the question is clear, even if it is as clear as should Alberta secede from the rest of Canada, yes or no. The House of Commons can just say, nope, that's not clear enough. Too bad. The House of Commons to consider whether there is clear will to secede. Not the people of the province, the House of Commons. Where the government of a province, following a referendum relating to the secession of a province from Canada, seeks to enter into negotiations on the terms on which that province might cease to be part of Canada, the House of Commons shall, except where it has determined pursuant to Section 1 that a referendum question is not clear, consider and, by resolution, set out its determination on whether, in the circumstances, there has been a clear expression of a will by a clear majority of the population of that province that the province cease to be part of Canada. Factors for House of Commons to take into account. In considering whether there has been a clear expression of the will by a clear majority of a population of a province that the province cease to be part of Canada, the House of Commons shall take into account the size of the majority of valid votes cast in favor of the secession option, the percentage of eligible voters voting in the referendum, and any other matters or circumstances it considers to be relevant. Not the people of the province, the Government of Canada. Other views to be considered. In considering whether there has been a clear expression of a will by a clear majority of the population of a province that the province cease to be part of Canada, the House of Commons shall take into account the views of all political parties represented in the Legislative Assembly of the province whose government proposed the referendum on secession, and any formal statements or resolutions by the government or Legislative Assembly of any province or territory of Canada, any formal statements or resolutions by the Senate, any formal statements or resolutions by the representative of Aboriginal peoples of Canada, especially those in the province whose government proposed the referendum on secession, and any other views it considers relevant. And let me remind you, the Senate is appointed by the government. No negotiations unless will clear. The Government of Canada shall not enter into negotiations on the terms on which a province might cease to be part of Canada unless the House of Commons determines, pursuant to this section, that there has been a clear expression of a will by a clear majority of the population of that province that the province cease to be part of Canada. Why do they put this stuff in here, ladies and gentlemen? Because the vote was so close in 1995. Excuse me. Constitutional amendments. Here is their piece de la resistance, their golden statement. It is recognized that there is no right under the Constitution of Canada to effect the secession of a province from Canada unilaterally, and that, therefore, an amendment to the Constitution of Canada would be required for any province to secede from Canada, which in turn would require negotiations involving at least the governments of all the provinces and the government of Canada. Again, do you really believe that the provinces and the federal government that rely on Alberta money are going to allow this? Limitation. No minister of the Crown shall propose a constitutional amendment to effect the secession of a province from Canada unless the government of Canada has addressed in its negotiations the terms of secession that are relevant in the circumstances, including the division of assets and liabilities. Any changes to the borders of the province, the rights, interests, and territorial claims of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, and protection of minority rights. Let me remind you what the treaties 6, 7, and 8 actually said. Despite your feelings on those treaties clearly state that the Aboriginal peoples of Canada in Alberta gave up all of their rights. You may not like it. I don't like it either. These are facts in law. I have done a video showing you what those treaties actually say. Despite all the gaslighting from the chiefs saying Alberta can't separate. But with the Clarity Act, all those chiefs have to do, despite not having any lawful rights in their claims because they gave up all their rights for privileges granted by the government at the end of a gun. If they write a formal statement, that's enough to shoot down Alberta separation. I don't like it any more than you do, ladies and gentlemen, but these are facts. And I'm trying to prepare you for the result. No matter how big the majority is, it's not up to the people. It's up to the government, and there is no way the federal government and the provinces receiving equalization payments can allow Alberta to secede. The provinces will collapse and Canada will collapse. Excuse me. Despite the fact that Canada has never had a legal and lawful constitution, that confederation is a myth, that all the British North America Act 1867 did was unite 4 British colonies into one British colony called the Dominion of Canada, which is clearly evident in the Interpretation Act of 1889, and which is also clearly evident in Section 11 of the Statute of Westminster. Meaning of colony in future acts. Notwithstanding anything in the Interpretation Act 1889, the expression colony shall not in any act of the Parliament of the United Kingdom passed after the commencement of this act include a dominion or any province or state forming part of dominion. It's telling you right there that after December 11th, 1931, the provinces of Canada were no longer British colonies and by default became sovereign states. So please use this information, use the links I provide, educate yourself, and call out all of these people that are hopium peddlers. We're right on the brink. Alberta's going to secede. Alberta's going to become the 51st state. I've just shown you, because of the 1995 referendum being so close, the federal government wrote the Clarity Act to prevent any further threat of a province or territory seceding from Canada. The illusion of freedom in a system of control. Holding a referendum on Alberta independence is merely the illusion of freedom. That we, the people, decide the outcome of that referendum, when clearly I've shown you that we don't. So please share this information, ladies and gentlemen, because the people of Alberta especially need to know what to expect. And keep in mind that they're already laying down the groundwork to also claim there was foreign interference, or not enough people in Alberta voted, or it wasn't a clear question, or it wasn't a clear majority. So be prepared. And start calling out these people and asking the question, what about the Clarity Act? How are you going to get around the Clarity Act when all it takes is some statements to shoot it down? And to believe that the provinces that receive equalization payments are going to allow this to happen is ridiculous, because they're not. Because they cannot survive without Alberta money. Period. Use the links I provide. Read these documents for yourself and share them with others. Because the path to independence was laid out for us December 11th, 1931. Through the Statute of Westminster. They just didn't tell the people, and all of these people involved in the independence movement, if they don't know these facts, they have no business leading this charge. And if they do know these facts, which I believe they all do, they're deceiving us. And again, not my words. I've shown you how this works and why it came about. 49.42 to 50.58. For example, if the Alberta independence referendum came out with results close to this, they would say, no, that's not a clear majority. That's not enough for a clear majority. And there's a bunch of people that didn't vote. So, denied. Sorry. And then what do you think they were going to do to the people of Alberta? Please share this information. Again, I'm not trying to dissuade you from voting in a referendum. I'm trying to prepare you for the predetermined results. Stay tuned, and thanks for watching.